to Legacy Keepers podcast. This is Kare and Anita, your hosts, and our topic today is cultural shifts over time and how younger generations respond to older ones when it comes to cultural norms. So, I
Interesting
was
topic.
thinking about, sorry, what was that?
I was like, interesting topic.
And I was like, we got to be careful with this. But again, because we were recently working on your grandmother's memoir,
Yeah.
we of course have, her story and some of the things that she went through and some of the things that she said in her memoir top of mind. And one of the things that was really that really sat with me in my mind was the fact that she was talking about how her husband at the time was taken prisoner and sent to a concentration camp in Serbia, and this was during World War II.
In Siberia,
What did I say?
Serbia.
Oh, Siberia. Yes.
Yeah.
Siberia is way worse because it's way more remote and cold there. So thank you for correcting that. Anyways, and how she was talking about she had three young children at the time, and she was living life as a single mom, but also having to work, you know, and hold down, all of, the fort, the home, all the finances, as well as dealing with being right in the middle of a war and never knowing if she was safe or if her children were safe. And then later on in the story, she talks about how when they were actually sent away from where they were living in the Ukraine, and basically told to get out, for various reasons, and they sort of made their way to Germany. And there she's talking about this time where, they were in carts, like horse-drawn carts, and they kept getting stuck in the mud. And she made the point of saying, our husbands weren't here to fix the axles every time they got broken, and that made it more difficult, but they still figured it out, didn't they?
Yeah.
And so, why I'm bringing that to mind is the concept of culture, cultural shifts, what we think about what culture is in any day, in any at any time, and also a little bit about the
Mhm.
gender roles, because I think that's something that is really big today that we're talking a lot about today is gender roles. And why I wanted to bring that up is because we have an idea of what gender roles are today. We are trying to break them a little bit. We are trying to find much more equality for all people, regardless of their sex or their gender. And we think again that a lot of what is being experienced today, you know, um, a lot of the equality perhaps that we're experiencing or seeking, and the gender bending roles just a little bit is new. And I'm like, it's not new. It's not new. Since the beginning of time, women have been warriors, women have been hunters, women have, held down the fort, so to speak. They have been really good with weapons. Yes, we are the life bearers, the life givers. We rear the next generation. But there are also cultures where men have primarily raised the children and women go off and do the work. So your Oma story from World War II there, where she's talking about they did it all. The women did it all. And you know what? They did it well.
Yeah,
And that
they
that go
definitely did.
and it tells me that what we think is gender roles now, or what we think that we've had to kind of go through, it's not new, right? I mean, it's not new. I mean, that's just your Oma story from World War II. But what about 100 years before that, and 1,000 years before that, and 10,000 years before that? You know what I mean?
Oh,
And then
my mind is going like to so many different places, but keep going.
right. And I was just going to say, and then how does that relate to the younger generation and what they think is
Yeah.
normal, is cultural, is things that are shifting? So I'll stop there and let you get into it. But I just wanted to kind of do a bit of a mind dump because my mind is really churning. But yeah, tell me what you think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because over the holidays, like one of my favorite childhood movies is Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And
Right?
recently, Dick Van Dyke has done this celebration of life while he's still living. He's 99 right now. And it's on
Wow.
YouTube. You gotta check it out. It's so moving.
Okay.
But he's surrounded by his whole family now, but he's still that funny, dancing like crazy silly guy.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I was moved to watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang over the holidays. And so that movie I think was made in 1937 or something like that, the original black and white.
yeah. Okay.
But so in it, like the woman comes in her motor car, which is like one of those crank motor cars, and she happens near their property, and the children run across the street, and she ends up in like some water or whatever. And he comes out and he says, women who get motor cars should know how to drive them. If a woman's going to drive a car, they should know what they're doing. And kind of like, I'm like, oh my goodness, that would never fly these days. Like to say something like that in a movie, right? And
Right? I know.
and then I was just with my daughter. We were watching old Sex and the City reruns. So this is now 1998 was season one of Sex and the
Hmm.
City. And even, and that's got great woman dialogue in that, right? The four friends
Yeah,
but even how they're talking about the men in their life and their role, it still felt old compared to now, right?
yeah.
Like, and that's 25 years ago. So,
Hmm.
although that sounds like a lot to me, that's a blink of an eye at this point, right? I can't
Hmm.
believe it was that
Hmm.
long ago that show even started. But anyway, so you do see, like, especially when you're watching things like movies, you see how people talked back then, and then the evolution of that to, and I'm not saying how we talk now is any better, because in some ways it's gotten better as far as equality and everything goes, and in other ways we're more tied up in knots because we're scared of everything we say now being the wrong thing, right? But yeah, things have definitely changed over the years, and that whole idea of like you said with my Oma's story, yes, they went and planted the farms and did everything because the men weren't there. And yes, they were totally capable and did a great job. But honestly, I have a husband, and am I grateful that he can handle some of those harder labor things? 100%. Like, I don't
Yeah,
want to have to do that. Could I do it if I had to? Probably.
exactly.
But do I
Yes,
want to? No. I'm glad that he's there, like doing those
that's right.
things.
You raise some really good points, and this is why I think, again, this brings me back to the whole concept of like charting your legacy, keeping, the memories alive, writing memoirs, journaling. All of that is really important because we have to compare, then and now and what's to come.
Mhm.
Not just facts, not just history in terms of these are the facts that happened. This country, conquered this country and that war happened and, whatever. Not just that. Those things are important, but more so, how we perceive them is important. Culture is important. How we relate to that. What's popular, what's not popular, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. It's important because it's informative. It schools us. It helps us be better people at the end of the day. And often, what I was trying to get at earlier is it actually can put us in our place a little bit. Do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, do we actually think we're all that unique? And yes, we have a lot of uniqueness now. Right now, technology is unfreaking believable what it's doing, and it's just getting better and worse all at the same time.
Yeah.
And we're on this cusp of life literally changing. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're not even going to recognize what life is. 50 years from now, I don't believe we're going to recognize humans, but that's a whole different topic. But my
Yeah.
point is, there's elements of what we experience and what we go through that isn't unique at all. And when we can read other people's stories and their legacies, and we go back and we see what they went through and how they perceive that, we're like, oh, that's really not all that different to what maybe I'm going through. So a couple of things come to mind, and I want to share this, and I hope I'm not going to go too long. But I remember, I guess I don't know if I was reading an article or listening to like maybe a podcast or something, but it was quite a few years ago, and it was somebody who was part of helping refugees I think it was Africa, maybe some African country. And again, we're talking like decades ago. And they were working with refugees in like a huge refugee camp. And we're talking thousands of people that were displaced. And it was a story about that and what that experience was. And at the end of the day, this person who was sharing some of what they'd experienced as they did this work, helping these refugees, they were like, the funny thing is, here I was working with these refugees, and they were just going through absolute hell. They were living in these tents. There was no running water. There was no proper toilets. There was sewage, like raw, human waste everywhere. They didn't have water to drink. They didn't know when their next meal was coming from. There was a lot of strife, a lot of violence. You just didn't know if you were safe and if you were going to see tomorrow. And this person, I believe it was a woman, was saying, and at the end of the day, when I was talking to these people who were living this life and this was their lived experience, I really thought that they were going to want to talk about all of that. And they didn't. All they wanted to talk about was that their cousin was cheating on their husband and that, this thing was going on. And she was like, it blew my mind that even though they were going through literally a lived hell, they still wanted to talk about the relationships with other people and
Interesting.
how that affected their lives, and they
Yeah.
still wanted love and romance and family, and I thought,
So
wow.
you're saying like there's some basic things that are
Mhm.
kind of overarching all the different events in our lives that rise to the top even in those times of hardship.
I think so. And human relationships are
Yeah.
among those. And we will always have those. We always need them, desire them, loathe them. They
Yeah.
cause strife and beauty in our lives. And we want to talk about that, especially as women. We want and need to talk about them, even when we're living in hell on earth.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting to me. And that goes to show you a little bit about, yes, culture shifts, but culture tends to shift, not necessarily. I mean, yes, it does shift with beliefs, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. But our beliefs, the way culture shifts in terms of our beliefs and what we believe is moral or okay or acceptable,
Mhm.
I think changes a lot slower than behavior.
Yeah.
Behavior changes more quickly. Language changes more quickly. Slang, swear words, common phrases,
Yeah.
right? What we wear, how we look, that changes quickly. But what we believe and then how our actions based on what we believe changes more slowly.
Mhm.
So one more little story, if I can, and then I'm going to give you the mic because I do this. I tend to.
But you have so many good things
Sorry.
to say.
Oh, thank you, honey. Okay, so I had this experience, maybe a couple years ago. You know how I like to write fiction, right? Like I'm a creative writer. I like to write
Yeah.
uh, stories of fiction. And I would say about, what am I now? In my late 50s. And so when I was in my early 20s, so I don't know what, 25 years ago or something like that, 20, 30, whatever, long time ago. I can't do the math. 35 years. Anyways, I can't do math like when I'm
On the
under
spot.
pressure. Anyways, okay, a long time ago, I used to take the GO train in Ontario from Burlington to Toronto to go to work every day. I worked in a law office, and I loved that train ride so much because I would sit there and I would write. This was before laptops, so I wrote everything longhand, and I was working on a novel back then about three young women who lived together. They were roommates, and of course, I was living with two friends at the time, and there was loosely based on my roommates. But anyways, long story short, there's a scene that I wrote at a wedding. Okay, and one of these characters, in her name is Ruby, and Ruby had gone to this wedding and she met a guy at this wedding. Okay, and at one point he invites her to go outside. Okay, and so they go outside and he has a bottle of wine with him. And Ruby was a good church going girl. She really didn't drink very much. So a bottle of wine shared between two people was absolute on the floor drunk for Ruby. Okay.
Okay.
So anyway, she ends up getting like completely wasted on this bottle of wine with this guy and has sex with him on the back of a car at this wedding. Okay. And then the next day, her girlfriends find out about it and they hold her accountable to this. And they basically give her shit for behaving that way. And she gives herself shit And she owned that. She took that on to herself and believed her to now be not a good Christian girl because she a got drunk and then had sex with this young man. And a couple years ago, I reread this scene and I was mortified. I was mortified, Anita, that I wrote that and that I believed that it was okay that that happened in that way. Because now I would be like, she had a freaking agenda, and that was sexual assault because she could not consent to having sex with this young man if she were drunk. And she honestly didn't even remember it, you know? So I was like, back then, I wrote that when I was in my young 20s. And I was like, to me, that seemed, yeah, look at her, look what she did. And now I'm like, oh, I, I cannot hold her responsible for, I would write that scene in a completely different way.
Mhm, mhm.
And so that's an example of how culture does shift.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a mixed bag, right? Because yes, well, that is 100% true. And we've made lots of good progress in those kind of areas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other side of it is it can go swing too far, right? And I don't want to get into too many examples of that because I think it's still controversial as far as what's too far and all of that. And we all have our
Yeah.
different beliefs about it. But there was things that happened to us as when we were young that we just wrote off as normal. I'll say men's
Yeah.
behavior towards us or whatever, how we
Yes.
were spoken to or and now,
Yeah.
but now we're at the point where people don't know what to say anymore because they're afraid of getting it wrong, right?
To some
So
degree.
it,
Yeah.
it can go to a good place and then sometimes it can also go too far. Um,
Yes.
Not to say that there aren't great progress and great strides in understanding I don't think men fully to this day understand what women have to go through. I know my husband used to walk on this trail at early in the morning, like at 6 a.m., and it would be dark sometimes. And he
Yeah.
said he passed a woman who was jogging or something, and as she got closer to him, she maybe put her keys between her fingers or she did
That's right.
something.
That's right.
And as they passed, and he said it to me like, "What's her problem?" And I said, "You don't know. Women, we don't get to just go for a walk or a run when it's dark out and not think I need to protect myself, right?
Yes.
We have to think about all those things." And so men aren't always aware. And of course, he would never do something to someone. So for him, he doesn't think that way. But he
Hmm.
understood, women are always going to be women. We're always going to have though some of those things don't change, right? No matter what awareness there is in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. And again, that is about perception. It's about lived experience. And it's
Yeah.
about not, it, in that moment, it wasn't about your husband being who he was. It was about her
Yeah.
and that woman and her lived experience and what she felt comfortable. And he took that personally, thinking, oh, she doesn't trust me. And how could that's so offensive? And I'm like, just wait a minute here. Because really, that moment wasn't about you at all. She doesn't know you. And
Yeah.
that's the point. She knows herself and she knows her lived experience and maybe some of the, moments in which she's felt like she's been at risk or whatever. And
Well,
she needs to
or
see it. And what she did was responsible.
yeah, or even if she hasn't, like maybe for him, it could mean, oh, from now on, when I see a woman alone like that, I'm going to give them lots of space so that they feel comfortable because now
That's
he
right.
has heard it from another perspective, right?
And so it's a really good demonstration of how culture does shift. And I do think it is really good that it is shifting in that way because men do have a lot to understand in that regard. But
Yeah.
let me ask you this. How does this relate to then legacy keeping? And how
Yeah.
do those cultural shifts relate? Do we write about them? Do we not? Should I actually go back and finish that novel and write the scene the way I originally wrote it? And do you know what I mean? Like how does,
Well, I
in your
guess
opinion, how does that relate?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, from the perspective of the book, if you're going to write a book from that era, you should write it like it is that era. And so,
Yeah.
because it's a piece of time, right? So that piece of time doesn't relate to this piece of time if you're truly writing it in that piece
Yes.
of time. So it would
Yeah.
really depend on what your point is in the book and what you want to get across. But I don't have a problem with that. I like
Yeah.
watching old shows or old movies and hearing how we used to talk. And I don't think, I mean, they're removing things from the shelves now because they're saying it's sexist or whatever. No,
Hmm.
it's part of that time, right? So we don't
Yes,
have to be have a big X over everything hasn't that is from that time. But also I think like this is the interesting about the legacy keepers is there's been studies done now that more and more women as we age are not, if we're single, we're not looking for another partner because
no.
we have financial freedom of on our own. We have that independence. We enjoy things the way we like them and having our independence. And so that's been a shift. It used to be, if a woman's husband died, they looked for another husband to take, not just to take care of them, but, as a team to live through life, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
we don't need that as much anymore. And I think that's changing
that
for
is
us
very
as we
true.
age. And so that's an interesting story to talk about. We can still talk about how it used to be,
Hmm.
and recognize, look at it's changed, and maybe some of those things are for the better, right?
Hmm.
That
Yeah,
hey, we can be financially independent now because women have worked now. We're allowed to have a
yeah,
credit card and buy a house. In the Sex and the City episode, this is in the 1990s. She went to buy an apartment in New York, and they kept asking her, "Is your husband gonna sign?" And she's like, "No, it's just me." "Oh, so then is your father gonna?" And I mean, I started a company in 1991. I was 23 years old, 24. And do you know how many? So I had a business partner who was 23 and a male. Okay. Do you know how many people, when I would go to do a business deal, they would say, "So, where's your father?" And I'm like, my dad owns a gas station. Like, do you need some work done on your car? Like, why? But
wow.
they would right away assume that because I was a 24-year-old female in the early 90s, that I couldn't be the owner, the business owner.
Hmm.
And that was, I loved the day I turned 30 because I finally felt, okay, maybe someone will take me seriously now. Because at least at that point, then I was married, had one kid, and I still had the business. But I felt maybe people will take me more seriously because now I'm
Interesting.
24 and a female, two big strikes against you in the business world.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back really quickly to what you said about, books and movies and stuff being taken off the shelf because, they're not culturally appropriate anymore and they're considered inappropriate or I don't know, a bad influence.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them, I don't know all of them, and maybe some of them are bad and shouldn't be on the shelves just because they're intrinsically not good entertainment or good to watch. I don't know, but for the most part, I agree with you, and I don't think that we should. I think that we shouldn't remove them because I think that the culture of the day is necessary. I think we should maybe have a warning, or there should be like a disclaimer on the title of the book or something. I don't know, but I think to just take them away entirely um, removes so
It's
much of what
erasing our
history was.
history. It's like erasing our history.
Exactly.
That actually
Exactly.
happened. And by still reading it, we can recognize how far we've come, or we can recognize, wow, I don't want to make that mistake, again. And I think there's also some good things. The other day I'm out walking the dog and I didn't bring my phone. And part of me always goes, oh, I don't have my phone. What if somebody needs what if one of my kids call and I don't answer, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I lived the first 30 years of my life without a cell phone. We went out and played all day and nobody could get a hold of us and we were just
Hmm.
fine, right?
Yeah.
And so it's some of those things that we can also look back and go, oh, wow, they didn't have phones, they didn't have this, but maybe there was some good in that too. And maybe we can learn from that too, that we should take more time away, disconnected. Or,
Yes.
so I think the history and the modern history or today, they can we can learn from the good and the bad of it and bring it
Yeah.
forward together. We don't have to drop one or pretend it didn't happen.
And I do think we need to record it. I do think we need to, again, I feel like I say this so much in our podcast, but I think it's really important to remember that everything that we've experienced, you and I, everybody listening, and every other person, that has lived on the face of this earth, they do have a legacy. They
Mhm.
do have memories, they have knowledge, they have history, they have wisdom, and they have cultural perceptions and cultural behaviors and cultural
Yes.
beliefs.
Yeah.
And if we don't record them, if we don't write those memoirs, engage in those, audio recordings and podcasts and interviews, do those journals, write those stories, um, all of that gets lost for that person. And you know what came to my mind earlier? And then
Mhm.
maybe we can just sort of wrap it up after this when you were talking earlier about how women, a lot of women aren't having children now, or they're delaying that, or they're only having one child, or there is there's a difference now where it used to be, in our grandmother's age, they were having like three, four, five, six, seven kids more, and then there was three kids, and then there was two, and now everybody's having one or something or none.
None.
And I thought, what's going to happen is is there's going to be a whole generation or several generations that completely miss the history and wisdom of the people that went before, because if there's no children to tell them to,
Yeah.
do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I said that well, but I'm saying it hit me when you said that. I was like, oh my gosh, we're at risk for losing so much because there's nobody to tell it to. We have to get these things down.
Well, and we no longer have what's it called, the nuclear home. Like people now live far away from each other, right? So
Yeah,
my Oma's story comes from an interview that my uncle and my cousin interviewed my Oma with a tape recorder. So this is way back probably in the 80s or something, to get her story. It doesn't have to be the son or the daughter, like
that's right.
because family all lived together. We all shared in
Yeah,
each other's stories, whereas now writing it down is more important than ever because my parents live in Ontario and I live in BC. And
that's right.
our kids could move all over the world. We've become a global place now. It's no
Yeah,
longer that you grow up in the same community and die in that community, right? So
exactly.
writing it down is more important than ever so that we can share it with those loved ones that don't live near us.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I mean, we've talked about so many things in this particular episode,
Yeah.
and I think we're going to have to revisit quite a few of them over time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just what the world is today and in any given era, and what cultural beliefs and practices are, is fascinating.
Hmm.
And also I just think just so interesting, in the moment, but even when we read that from before, it
Yeah,
really does give us food for thought.
it
Yeah.
does.
Well, anyways, I guess we should wrap this up. And I definitely want to say to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Kare and Anita reminding you to keep your legacy alive.
Bye.
Bye.